Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, helping you to find jargon-free information before choosing a professional to help solve your problems and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stuart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And on this segment of the show, I'm so pleased that we finally have divorce mediator and coach Laurie S. Rubenstein, who is the owner of Laurie S. Rubenstein LLC, and she's calling in all the way from Cottonwood, Arizona. I just love the sound of that, Cottonwood. It just sounds like a really small, romantic place, and it probably isn't, but it just sounds funny. Cottonwood. I like the sound of that. Anyway, I digress. Laurie, who is, considered to be an authority in the area of divorce and forgiveness, will be talking to you today about why forgiving your ex is mandatory for having a happy, healthy future. Now, that sounds like something which is going to be a really interesting conversation. So if you are one of the increasing numbers of people who are considering your options for divorce in the Cottonwood, Arizona area, it might be a good idea just for you to stop what you're doing, log out of Facebook, the Twittering, the Instagramming, or anything else that ends with ing that may cause a distraction. And you may even want to grab yourself a notepad and pen and get ready to take some notes as we listen in to what Laurie has to share with us today. So with that said, let's not keep her waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Laurie.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm really happy to be here.
And we are so happy to have you here as well, my dear. Let's just jump feet first in. Before we get to the actual meat and potatoes of the interview, as we like to say in the UK, the meat and potatoes, it goes without saying that anything you share with us today, Laurie, is not legal advice or legal assistance. It's purely for the purpose of sharing general information. Now, can you just expand on that in your own words, please, so that everybody knows exactly what we're trying to achieve here today?
Yes, absolutely. So, we attorneys love to cover our butts.
Exactly.
And I'm going to give information that people can use anywhere in the world because it's all about personal relationships. It's not really, I'm not going to be talking about legalities, but I'm going to be talking about your life, your family, your relationship. And so people can use that anywhere.
Okay, thanks for sharing that then, Laurie. So now that everybody's clear about what we are trying to achieve today, tell us a little bit about your company, Laurie S. Rubenstein LLC, the people you serve, and the kinds of situations that they find themselves in when they come to you for your help.
I can say that I'm a divorce attorney. I was a divorce attorney for many years. But what I really do is help people to mend their relationship hurts, to move on with their life. It's not just about their divorce, but it's about the relationship that they're going to have with their ex, with their in-laws, with their children in the future. The most important relationships of their life. It's about healing their past so that they can really have a great relationship in the future.
Okay then, Laurie. So what are the advantages, let's say, of forgiving your ex so that you can live a happy and healthy future for people who are in divorce? What are the advantages of that? Sounds obvious, but please, in your own words.
Yeah, well, what I learned, so I was a divorce attorney for 18 years and mediator, and then I've been doing coaching, divorce coaching, and training people to be divorce coaches for the last 12 years. And what I found is that forgiveness is really the cornerstone of healing, of being able to move on with your life. It's very difficult to get people to even have a divorce agreement if somebody is still really angry, bitter, holding on to, hurt feelings. Once they actually forgive, they can start coming up with really great creative solutions that will work in their future.
Okay, so what do you feel are some of the biggest myths out there when it comes to forgiving your ex then, Laurie?
Well, one of the biggest ones, and I love this one because I was all about this one,
Right.
that forgiveness means letting someone off the hook, that what they did is okay. Because people will really get very black and white. And, of course, as an attorney, I was all very black and white thinking. There was right, there was wrong. And so when someone does something wrong and they hurt you, you don't want to let them off the hook. You want to punish them. And what we don't realize is that forgiveness is really about letting ourselves off the hook. It's about not carrying on the anger and the bitterness in our bodies. I remember watching Oprah, back in the 80s and 90s, and she would have somebody on who would forgive the person who murdered their child. And I would be like yelling at the TV, don't let them off the hook.
Exactly.
Don't forgive. And they would talk about things like feeling so much peace afterwards, and I just didn't get it. I didn't get it, Stuart, until I went through it myself.
Okay, so with that said then, Laurie, what are one or two, and I say one or two because I know there are just so many of them out there, but what are one or two common misconceptions around the legal industry?
Well, one big one, and I do think I know we have a lot of attorneys on the show too, and I'm hoping that they don't do this, but there's a belief that you have to spend a fortune to get divorced, that you have to fight, that you have to make sure that all your rights are met. And I know in the U.S., we're a country of rights and very often not of responsibility. And I would I've always done this. I've always tried to talk to my clients more about responsibility and taking responsibility for the decisions made in your divorce, for the financial issues, for, dealing with your children, for visitation, custody, that it's very important to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and feel like you did the right thing by your family, even if somebody else doesn't deserve it, I want to say. So, so we don't have to be all about the fight. We can be about our family is changing, and what does that look like in the future?
Right. So what are some of your clients' most common fears about forgiving their ex then, Laurie?
I want to say before we even get to the forgiveness part about their fears, one of the biggest things that happens is when you go through a divorce, often you'll feel like a failure. This is the most important relationship in my life, and I blew it. And, family members will make you feel that way. Friends will make you feel that way. And there's going to be some forgiveness, not just for your ex, but for yourself. That you didn't have that relationship that you thought you would have. The other thing is that there's a belief, that you're going to, a fear that you're going to really screw up your kids forever. And what I really want to say is that divorce doesn't screw up your kids. You do. And what I mean by that is when you make a choice to put down the other parent of the child, when you decide to use your child to get information on the other parent, when you decide that you're not going to have rules that are consistent with the other parent's rules, when you start doing things that hurt your children, you can look at it and say, oh, the divorce did it, or again, go back to that personal responsibility. You don't have to screw up your kid. you can make that choice not to do that. And I think that that's sort of the biggest fear, is that you're going to mess up your kids, or the other parent's going to disappear. That's another fear that people have.
So all that said and done then, Laurie, how can people actually get past those fears then?
Well, one of the main things, and everyone has the ability to do this, is to change your perspective about what a divorce means. So a divorce, when people think about divorce, the first thing, when they hear, like let's say you hear your friend is going through a divorce, you'll say something like, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that." Because we look at it as a failure or a tragedy in our life. And and I've been on this sort of rampage, I guess, to say to people that divorce can be a gift. I mean, what I see with people is that they can use the divorce to really look at themselves. What mistakes did I make in a relationship? How can I change how I am in a relationship with other people? How can I use this divorce as an opportunity for growth? Because, when we're down, we're out. This is a time to say, how can I be different now so that I don't do the same thing over and over again in my life? And I think divorce is a great opportunity for personal and spiritual growth.
And I totally concur with that divorce is a great opportunity for growth. As being a child of divorce myself, it's the reason why I'm actually doing this particular series of Let's Call Divorce, because it's helped me. It's given me an opportunity to grow with every single show, with every single guest that comes on here. The main reason for me speaking with you today, Laurie, and the hundreds of other divorce professionals that I've interviewed is, I was a child of divorce, as I've alluded to already. I was about 8, 9 years old when my parents went through a very bloody, a very violent, there was lots of conflict. So I was in the middle of that, caught up in the middle, not knowing what to do, not having any resources to cope with that. So I ended up carrying the guilt of my parents' breakup. I carried that through my young childhood years, through my teenage years, through my 20s, 30s, and it wasn't until my mid-40s that I actually began to start looking about what I could do about this, because I just noticed how much effect it was having on my life and the decisions that I was making in life. So, fast forward to today, I've turned that situation that I was in into something positive by having a show like this and inviting experts like yourself to come on here and share all these fantastic insights like you've been doing so far today, in the hope that the listeners out there, if they do find themselves in similar situations to my parents, where there's lots of conflict, there may even be violence and lots of blood, and children are caught up in the middle, my hope is that they listen to the fantastic insights that are shared on this show and look at things from a different perspective and decide to, communicate with each other on a more amicable basis, and to put their children first. Because as I always say, love your children more than you hate yourselves at this particular moment. So my goal with this show is giving those children, indirectly through experts like yourself, a voice. I call them the invisible voices out there. So divorce is an opportunity for people to grow spiritually, absolutely. And also, on a personal level, it's an amazing opportunity, but not just for people in divorce, but for, people like myself who have been quote unquote victims of divorce as well. So I thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing that particular point there about divorce being an opportunity for growth. What do you have to say about that, Laurie?
Yeah, and I really want to thank you and honor you, Stuart, for doing this work, because I think it is single most important work we can be doing today to help these kids. I mean, when we talk about well, first of all, I mean, I was also a child of divorce, and I always say my parents did divorce very poorly.
Right.
Every single solitary weekend, there was yelling and screaming and carrying on. You know, they did everything opposite of what I teach now today. But then again, I feel grateful to them, because if that didn't happen, if I didn't have that being raised in a divorced environment like that, I would not be doing the work I do today.
Exactly.
Obviously. And I think we always have to role model for other people how they can be in their divorces. So, for example, when I was an attorney, I would be talking to my client on the phone, and they would be telling me something about their ex, but I could hear their kids in the background. And they would say to me something like, I would say, well, let's not talk about this now. Let's wait until your kids aren't in the house. And they're like, oh, don't worry, they're playing. They don't hear. Like, they hear everything.
I'm screaming at the microphone right now. They pick up on every single nuance, people. We pick up on everything. Exactly.
Right. So, these kids, and it's interesting, like in the court system, the family law cases are one of the lowest level cases. Like most judges don't want it, most attorneys don't want to do that kind of work. And they look at it as an unimportant kind of case. And I think this is one of the things that societally there are so many divorced kids, going to school, and whether it's more kids are in poverty as a result of that, more kids are, being bounced back and forth. They don't have stability of one household. They have to learn different rules in different houses. They end up learning how to be manipulative and play their parents against each other. Many kids drop out of school. Many kids get in trouble. I mean, all these things happen because people don't decide to put their children first, as you said, rather than trying to hurt and get back at the other parent.
Exactly, and I can just echo that in terms of the effect that it had on me as a young child. So imagine this: I'm 8-9 years old. My parents, as I said before, they're going through this situation. There's lots of conflict, there's lots of violence, there's fighting, and I'm going to school. And in school, my school work throughout the year was always fantastic. However, and the pattern followed on into high school, whenever I sat down to write an exam, I used to fail. And I used to fail it deliberately. Now, I never knew at that time I was failing it deliberately. I never knew that I was just following a pattern that was, put before me, things that I was led to believe, and hearing my mother say, your father's this, your father's that, you're useless, you'll come to nothing. And then in her anger, saying the same things to me, and then me actually believing that in my poor little subconscious mind. I never knew that. So the teachers used to be so frustrated, they used to say, because they used to say all to the other kids, hey, look at Stuart Alexander, he's great. I was a model kid at school, the football captain, the cricket captain, great work. I was a prefect. But when it came to the exams, I used to fail. And the teachers just never understood what was wrong. So I was following that imprint in my subconscious mind that my father was a failure and you're a failure as well. You don't deserve success. And that pattern followed in not only my schoolwork, it followed on in friendships and in relationships with the opposite sex. And, it took me a long time to realize what was happening. And that had a huge impact on the decisions that you make in your early life. So for if you're listening in right now and you find yourself in that unfortunate position of, where there is conflict, then take it from me, take it from Laura. We are children of divorce. We're adults now, but would you like your children? Think about those beautiful children you had. Think about how you felt about your partner when you first met. You were in love. You got married. You had children. It's the most sacred thing you could ever do. Think about that and think about, would you like your children when they grow up to be talking like I am talking right now?
Exactly. If you could see me now, I'm just shaking my head. Yes, 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 yes.
Right.
And the thing is, you were a good child. And so as a good kid, you're not going to even get that attention, that kind of attention, where for me, I acted out so that I would get the attention.
Right.
Because I was everything was such a mess. So I started acting out, and I always played dumb also. I was in, the lowest groups. I didn't know I was smart until I was an adult. Nobody ever told me that.
Oh, man.
And I just want to say this one sentence because I think this is important.
Sure.
When you put down the other parent, just to be very clear about what you were saying, when you put down that other parent, that your child is half of that parent. So you're telling them that there's something wrong with them. And be very clear about that. They hear something's wrong with a parent, that means there's something wrong with them.
Well, we could go on and speak for days on this particular topic. However, we are limited by time. So let me just remind everybody who we are listening to today. My guest is divorce mediator and coach, Laurie S. Rubenstein, and she's here today talking about forgiving your ex so that you can live a happy and healthy future. Now, with that in mind then, Laurie, what are some of the, let's say, perceived obstacles that you see which may be preventing people in divorce from seeking the help of a divorce mediator coach like yourself?
Of course, there's always money. That's always an issue. But also friends and relatives. So when you're going through a divorce, it's sort of like you're pregnant, where everybody's an expert and everyone has to tell you their horror stories. I would say don't listen, or listen and then make a decision. Really go to your own gut and say, is this true for me? Do I have to have a divorce be the same way? This is your life, so if you want the pieces of your life to fall into place, you have to be responsible for that. And don't just go with the flow of what everyone tells you, and including me and Stuart.
Exactly.
Just really, really take responsibility for your family, your children, and make the decisions that are right for them. You're their advocate. Be the advocate that they need.
So share an example of how you've helped divorcing couples to overcome these obstacles and succeed in forgiving their ex.
Well, I've had, obviously, thousands of people going through divorce. But I want to tell a story that I think is a little interesting about a person who came to me 20 years after their divorce. Their children are grown up. Their children have children of their own. And their children were telling their mother that she's driving them crazy, that she is so involved in their life, she has no boundaries, and she has no life of her own. And she needs to see somebody to get a life of her own. And that's how she came to me, just for coaching, personal coaching. It all led back, interestingly, to one, her mother died very young, and she mythologized her mother as a saint. And her mother was the greatest, best mother in the world and basically gave up her whole life for her kids. And so that's what she wanted to do. The other thing that kept her from moving on with her life was she was so angry at her ex. When she got divorced from him, Now, he wasn't a bad guy. He was a drinker. He loved her. He provided for her, but he was a drinker, and he wasn't what she really wanted. It wasn't the life that she wanted. So she divorced him, and she made the choice to give up access to his pension, child support, spousal support, as long as he let her have the kids. She took the kids and moved across the country, making sure he didn't have a relationship with the kids.
Right.
And then struggled. She became a professional, but she struggled and raised these kids on her own and made them her life. It all ended up going back to not forgiving her ex. She was so angry with him and held on to such bitterness. She ended up having like a mini stroke because, she was such a wreck. And when you hold on to unforgiveness this way and bitterness and rejection and anger, you're not allowing, your cortisol levels start going crazy. And your body doesn't have a chance to heal. And when you do this over a period of years, you have that stress that you are literally holding on to. It's destroying your body. So she comes to me, and we start talking about forgiveness. It blew her away because she thought, she was in the right. And, he's wrong, I'm right, and I'm a great mother. I do everything for my kids, and this is the way it's supposed to be. So there was an opportunity. Her father got sick, and she went back to the town where she's from, and she ended up going. I think there was a wedding or something too. So she went there, and her ex was there, and we knew he was going to be there, so we practiced. And I always say, you don't have to tell your ex that you're forgiving. You don't have to, even have a conversation with them. You can just forgive, and on the spiritual level, things will work.
Right.
So she has this conversation with him, and he, basically tells her he never stopped loving her. He never understood why she was so angry, blah, 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 blah. And suddenly her heart just melted. And she saw him for the human being he was, not what she was always wanting him to be, and looked at the reality of the situation and was able to forgive him, move on. When she got back home, she was able to have good boundaries with her kids. She started exercising. She started working out. She started developing new friends in her complex. And she even started going on dates with other people.
Nice.
So it was really, it's interesting to see. I always feel like forgiveness is such a miraculous thing, And in my book, my forgiveness book, I have all these stories about, how people's lives have changed, and they were able to just open up to new experiences and new opportunities that you can't control that, and you can't design that in your life. It just is one of those, whether you call it a God thing or a spiritual thing, It's just something that happens.
So let me expand a little bit on this topic of forgiveness then, Laurie, if you will. Now, no matter what religion that you look at, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Muslim, whether you're a Sikh, Buddhist, whatever the case may be, there are always stories of forgiveness. They're the central, they make up a focal point of many different religions. Now, we're speaking today about forgiving your ex. Now, does that mean, and this may sound like somewhat of a silly or an obvious question, but to be able to forgive somebody, does that mean that you have to be a person of religious faith?
Absolutely, 100% no. So, forgiveness, when we talk, in my book, again, there's a 4-step process. I make it very easy for people to forgive. It was hard for me, though, to say, because I didn't have, a forgiveness teacher. I didn't have a coach. I knew that there was something about this, but I didn't understand what it was. I really thought it was like I would be a fool to forgive. I was weak. It wasn't courageous. And I didn't even understand the spirituality of it. We know that there are miracles in the world. That things happen that we can't necessarily explain. And forgiveness is one of those things. I used to teach this class called Transcending Divorce. And I taught this class because when I was an attorney, I would send people to counselors to get fixed, and they weren't getting fixed. And in this Transcending Divorce class, I would teach people, about how to deal with, like, their loss of dreams, for example. That was a really hard thing for people. The loss of what their future would be, a lot of different things. But when we got to the part of forgiveness, when we got to that place, miracles would happen. Court cases would resolve. People who were fighting with their ex, they would not be fighting anymore. Kids would be healthier. All these things would happen. And it wasn't about people telling their ex or even talking to their ex about it. It was just letting go of the hurt and the expectations that life was supposed to be one certain way. If you can let go and accept, this is the truth of my life now, how can I make it the best I can make it? You can let go of that anger and regret and use it as like we were talking about before, a way to start personally and spiritually growing.
So, Laurie, I think if you asked 100 people if forgiveness is a good thing, I think most people would tend to agree that it is a good thing. However, what are some of the, let's say, pitfalls or mistakes that one needs to keep in mind when you are considering forgiving somebody, or in this case, forgiving your ex?
One of the things that I think is really interesting is I don't want to should anybody about forgiveness. Right? And that oftentimes people would say, if I forgive, that means I need to be friends with the other person, or I need to trust them again. And it's very important to always put safety first. So if somebody is still, I'm going to say, reoffending, still doing the same things over, they're still yelling and screaming at you, they're still abusive, they're still trying to manipulate your life, it's harder to forgive. It's harder to forgive that person who's reoffending. One of the ways that makes it easier to forgive is by creating really good, solid boundaries in your life. And sometimes you have to, like create it and recreate them because people will violate those boundaries. But once you create good boundaries and you feel safe, forgiveness will come more naturally. And I really want people to hear that I am not shoulding anybody about forgiveness or saying you need to be friends with your ex. You don't have to do that. You just have to let go of the anger that destroys your life.
Oh boy, this is a fantastic discussion. I could just sit here and speak all day with you, Laurie. So tell me, it's never a clear, straight line path to where one finds themselves in life, right now at this particular point in one's life. So with that in mind, what was it that inspired you to become a divorce mediator and coach? Because I know you just didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to be a divorce mediator and coach. There's a winding path. What was it? Please share that with us, please, Laurie.
Well, as I said before, my parents did divorce very poorly. When I was in college, I wanted to be a social worker. And I started working in domestic violence, in the domestic violence field. And there were very few shelters at that time. We were really creating the path as we went. I ended up writing a book eventually called Freedom from Abuse, another one called Transcending Divorce. because I was really helping people, and mostly women at that time, I would say, although I've worked with tons and tons of men, to become whole and healthy and create good boundaries and take personal responsibility for their lives. But here's the thing. I went through my divorce. After 10 years of marriage, 2 kids, I said I would never be my mother. I'm not going to be my mother. I'm not going to go through a divorce. I'm going to stay married my whole life. And then, found out my husband was cheating and was just, absolutely shocked. And we went through a divorce very fast. We co-parented. We did all the right things. But all of a sudden, after 3 years of divorce, he filed a lawsuit to change child support and to do some different things around parenting. And we were in court fighting. I'm like, why are we doing this? How is it possible that I'm doing this, 3 years later? And I decided to do one of the divorce techniques that I had taught my people in my Transcending Divorce class, and I call it the higher self technique. So I'm gonna say it so that people who are listening can actually do this. I wrote a letter. I got into a meditative state and wrote a letter from my ex's higher self to me, to my higher self. So it wasn't who he is today, but, I'm thinking, who he is as a soul. And I'm writing this letter, and at the end so I write the whole letter, and within 3 days, he sent me an email that said, we should resolve this case. This is not, and I'm using these words, Stuart, really, he actually said, this is not spiritually in my highest my highest interest to be doing this. And within a week, the court papers were signed and done. It ended. Now, I never told him I wrote this letter. He didn't know I wrote that letter. I wrote it, connected, spiritually with him, and it ended. And I have seen this with so many people. It really is a miraculous kind of thing. That convinced me. I saw it with my clients, but that didn't even convince me. After doing it myself and seeing this happen, that convinced me that this must be a part of the divorce process. People must do this if they're going to work, move on with their lives. I've been happily married now for almost 8 years. Yay. I'm in a great relationship. And I just we just celebrated my granddaughter's 1-year-old birthday party.
Oh, amazing.
And my ex and his wife were there. My father and his wife were there, having to deal with my ex, having not seen him for many years. We all got along great. We got along wonderfully. We're not holding on to anything, and we're putting our children first. And my granddaughter would never even know that there were any issues between us.
So, Laurie, lots of things to think about, obviously. So what's the most important question that divorcing couples should ask themselves as they consider, forgiving each other so that they can get on with their lives and live a happy and healthy future?
I have this friend, Rosalind Sadaka, and she works with specifically with parents and kids. And she has this visualization that I love. So, visualizing yourself 10 years later. We're going through our divorce, and 10 years from now, I'm sitting at Thanksgiving, and my kids are talking about me and my ex, and what is it I want them to say? What kind of childhood do I want them to remember?
That's very powerful. Very powerful.
It's very powerful. It really moves me.
It does. It moves me. I was just, I kind of alluded to that earlier on when I was saying, what would you want your children to be saying when they're adults? So That's a very, very powerful analogy. So thanks for sharing that. So let me ask you this then, Laurie. When you think back to the hundreds of people that you have helped over the years, and when I say help, I mean the ones you've helped to create that transformation they were looking for when they initially reached out to you. Because essentially, even though you call yourself a divorce mediator and coach, essentially you're a transformationalist, right? You transform people's lives. You take them from point A to when they, let's say, walk into your office, to point B to where they're living that happy and healthy future. So when you're able to do that, and when you think about all of those people who you've helped to create that for them, what does it actually give you then, Laurie? How does that make you feel?
I don't want to cry. But you know, the idea that these people are treating their children differently, respecting their children as whole people, you know, who have a life, and they're not just hooked to them, you know, they're not going to feel the same way that they do about their parents, and really showing respect to the other spouse, forgiving themselves, showing themselves respect. They're teaching their children how to be. And if each generation we can be better parents to the next generation, you know, I mean, we see it around the world. You know, these young kids are standing up for their rights. These young kids, I mean, here in the U.S., you know, we have children who are dying in schools. And these children are now standing up saying, this is our life. You know, these are our lives, and we're going to stand up for that. I have to believe that what we're doing, what you're doing, Stuart, what I'm doing, is making the differences so that these children now can be stronger and better than we were, and certainly stronger and better than our parents were. You know, and every once in a while I'll get a note from somebody, you know, you did my divorce 20 years ago, or, you know, and you know, that stuff happens actually fairly frequently. And, you know, we because we're in it, you know, we're doing this every day. It might not seem as vital to the world, but when you hear things like that, you know, it's like, I can die tomorrow and know that I've made a real difference.
An impact.
And
exactly.
That feels great.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what the show's about. That's why I decided to call it Impact Makers Radio and only have guests that, are making an impact in their local or even on a national or sometimes even on a global level, but certainly making an impact on people's lives. I mean, now and again, I've had people reach back to the show and said, hey, we listened to, you know, my wife and I listened to XYZ show with, you know, Mr. X divorce mediator or divorce attorney, collaborative attorney, whatever the case may be. And yeah, you know, it made a difference. We decided to go to mediation, or, you know, we decided to be really cognizant of how we communicate in front of our children. And just, you know, when you mentioned you get a note now and again, a letter now and again that happens, and it just makes me feel like, yes, it is all worth it, because it's a lot of time, it's a lot of investment, you know, putting the shows online, getting them edited, and all the stuff that goes on in the background. And sometimes you wonder, is this really worth it? But then when something like that happens, then I totally understand what you mean there, Laurie. So thanks for sharing that with us. But my goodness, we are so over time. But you know something, Laurie? I just don't care. I don't care, because we're having a great discussion here today. So before we do close out, I've got just one or two more questions. Before we close out, what would you say is the most important thing for people in divorce that they should consider when evaluating a divorce professional, albeit a mediator, a coach, an attorney? What should they keep in mind when they're looking at a divorce professional?
So when somebody talks about your rights and how much they can get for you,
Mm-hmm.
they're talking about how much money you're going to pay them.
Right.
So instead, when someone talks about, ask you the question, what do you want? How do you want your family to look after this? What do you want out of this? And also see if they're walking their talk. Have they been divorced? Are they friendly with their ex? Can they get along? Can they co-parent? Are their children healthy? You're allowed to ask those questions of your divorce professional.
Right.
I don't think people do, but you can, and you're paying them really good money. So get the best one you can get. Not just the one that's going to go for the jugular. Get the one that's going to help your family be in the position you want them to be in at the end of all of this.
Maybe it would be a great idea to have those questions as a resource on your website if you don't already have it. Just a thought that came into mind.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So finally then, Laurie, if there is somebody out there who's been listening in and they feel that they want to know more about forgiving their ex so they can move on, get on with their lives and have enjoy a joyful, happy, healthy future, how can they find you? What's the best way to connect with you?
Well, I have a website called LoriRubenstein.com. It's LoriRubenstein.com. And they can also write to me at Lori Rubenstein. Or on Amazon, if they just put in my name, they can see the Transcending Divorce book, the Freedom from Abuse book, and the Forgiveness book. So they can, just order those online. And I think that would really help them too. If they can't, let's say afford to hire a divorce professional, this will give them a lot of resources to help themselves.
Fantastic. So how can they actually reach you personally or somebody in your company? Is there a phone number as well then, Laurie?
Yes, it's 9. So it's in the U.S., so it's 01, and then 928-634-0252.
Right, so what I'd like you to do for me then, Laura, because now that, the listeners have your phone number, even though you've been just so open today and you shared so many great insights, they may still be sat on the fence and wondering, shall I pick up the phone and give Laurie a call? Because if I do, maybe she's going to try and sell me everything under the sun. Maybe she's got a Fred Flintstone club, is going to hit me over the head and drag me to the back of her office and pull my wallet and my purse out of my bag. So please, let's just eliminate any risk whatsoever and just briefly break things down of exactly what will happen when they pick up the phone and call your number. Well, one of the things I will do is ask them, how can I help you? How can I serve you? How can I help you? I talk to people for, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes without charging people. And I have a sliding scale, so I'll help people that way too. I mean, I don't really feel like anybody should not get the help that they need. Coaching, is very expensive these days, and I've never really bought into that huge expense. So I will talk to them about their situation. I will give them some ideas about what they can do right now, and then if they decide that they want to coach with me, that's great. They can order books. They can just start, doing the work on their own. I have to say, though, Stuart, too, on my website, there is a ton of information. There's articles. There's a lot there that people can get some help that way too. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Laurie. We are out of time. I feel like we could just sit here and talk so much longer. It just feels like we've began to scrape the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, but we do have to go. So once more, ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, we have been listening to divorce mediator and coach Laurie S. Rubenstein. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, Laurie. You have certainly demonstrated without a doubt, 100% hands down, that you are a true educator, advocate, and helpful advisor for your client success. So thank you so much.
It was really my pleasure, and this was a wonderful interview and opportunity. Thank you so much, Stuart.
And I thank you so much, my dear. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. And I'd also like to take a moment to say a big thank you to you. Yes, to all those lovely listeners out there in the Cottonwood, Arizona area. Thank you for joining us on what I can only describe as a very insightful and informative conversation with one of the leading divorce mediators and coaches in the Cottonwood, Arizona area today. Her name is Laurie S. Rubenstein. Don't forget her name, Laurie S. Rubenstein. Make sure you do check her out. Give her a call. She shared her phone number. Visit her website. There are some fantastic resources on there. You know something, ladies and gentlemen, whatever you do decide to do after spending some time with Laurie today and listening to all of the fantastic insights that she shared with us, I am absolutely convinced that you are going to be in good hands. So that's it for today, folks. Again, my name is Stuart Andrew Alexander. I am a long distant relation to the British royal family, but they don't tell anybody. I'm their darkest secret. Okay, you do know that, Laurie, right? So don't tell anybody. It's our secret that Prince Charles is a naughty boy. Anyway, with that said, we'll be back shortly with some more leading divorce professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So, until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.